I want to tell you, something just happened on the floor of the House, which is absolutely going to stun you because it just stunned me when I just read it. It just happened. You ready for this? The Washington Compost covered it pretty well. A conservative budget proposal that would have cut an additional $22 billion across federal agencies on top of the $61 billion in cuts already proposed by House Republicans. So that would have been $83 billion, right? Failed. The vote failed amid sharp disagreements among Republicans over just how far Congress should go in seeking to rein in federal spending. More than 90 Republicans voted against this amendment, sponsored by Republican Study Committee Chairman Jim Jordan of Ohio. The final vote, 147 to 281, listen to this, saw members of the House Republican leadership splitting their votes, with House Majority Leader Eric Cantor of Virginia, Majority Whip Kevin McCarthy of California voting against the measure, and Budget Committee Chairman Paul Ryan of Wisconsin, Republican Caucus Chairman Jeb Hensarling of Texas voting in favor of it. Let me be clear. The number 2 and number 3 Republican leader in the House voted against $22 billion in additional spending cuts. The majority leader and the majority whip. The speaker doesn't vote. You got that? You've been hearing Eric Cantor all over TV and radio, and this Kevin McCarthy all over TV and radio, telling us how conservative they are, how they're serious about cutting, telling us about their pledge. And 90 of them, including those two, voted against cutting another $22 billion. Now, before I go on, let me give you some perspective. The deficit this year is expected to be $1.65 trillion. If they, just the Republicans, had voted to add the $22 billion in cuts to the $61 billion, we're talking $83 billion. So the deficit would still be close to $1.6 trillion. This is a spit in the bucket. But Eric Cantor and Kevin McCarthy and a bunch of the other non-Tea Party Republicans couldn't bring themselves to do it. And there were a couple of Tea Party Republicans who also voted against this cut. I'll get to them later. The measure would have achieved its $22 billion in additional cuts by making trims, I'm reading the article, of 11% across the legislative branch and 5.5% to all other non-security accounts, not including aid to Israel. 45 minutes of debate. It exposed sharp disagreements within the GOP. At least 10 Republicans spoke out in favor of the amendment, all of them members of the Republican Study Committee. That's a conservative group within Congress, within the House. Roughly an equal number of Republicans took to the floor to oppose the amendment. Half of them were members of the Republican Study Committee, whose members include more than 170 conservative House Republicans. Of course, all Democrats opposed it. That is, who spoke on the floor. California Republican Representative Dan Lundgren warned earlier Friday the amendment would paralyze the U.S. Capitol Police. He was greeted with applause from opponents of the amendment after arguing that across-the-board cuts are a lazy member's way to achieve something. Really? Pathetic, Mr. Lundgren, absolutely pathetic. He was rebutted immediately by Representative Marsha Blackburn, Republican Tennessee, who had helped bring the amendment to the floor on Jordan's behalf. Quote, I would take issue with saying any member of this House is lazy or that this is a lazy process, contending that 26 states have used across-the-board cuts to get their fiscal house in order. What's wrong with across-the-board cuts when you're talking about trillions and trillions of dollars? This is a surprise. Georgia Republican Representative Jack Kingston described himself as a proud RSC member, but he opposed the amendment because he argued that an across-the-board cut would put Obama administration officials in charge of the decision-making on how to cut. Just cut! Don't you get it? Cut! Across the board. Not across the board. Just do it. We're talking about another $22 billion on top of $61 billion. That's still a deficit this year of well over $1.5 trillion. What the hell is wrong with you people? Illinois Republican Representative Joe Walsh backed the deep cuts called for by the amendment. Now look how they report it. Deep cuts. Oh, they're so deep. 22 more billion out of a $3.6 trillion budget. Oh, they're so deep. Meanwhile, if they have a spending increase of $22 billion, they think that's nothing, right? Oh, what's the big deal? $53 billion for high-speed rail? What's the problem? But a $22 billion cut? Oh, that's massive.